In the annals of history, few names inspire as much awe and fear as Xerxes I, the Persian king whose ambition reshaped the ancient world. Ascending to the throne in 486 BCE, Xerxes inherited an empire at the height of its power, stretching from the Indus Valley in the east to the Aegean coast in the west. His father, Darius I, had consolidated Persian dominance over much of the known world and had already cast a long shadow over the Greek city-states, having attempted to subjugate them in the earlier Greco-Persian Wars. The failed invasion of Darius, which culminated in the Persian defeat at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE, left an indelible mark on Xerxes, instilling in him a burning desire not only to avenge his father, but to secure his own legacy as the most powerful ruler of the ancient world. Xerxes was a man molded by wealth, power, and the rigid hierarchies of the Persian court. From a young age, he was trained in the arts of governance, warfare, and ceremonial grandeur. Unlike his father, whose reign emphasized administrative efficiency and diplomacy, Xerxes leaned toward spectacle and displays of power. Chroniclers like Herodotus describe him as ambitious, temperamental, and fiercely conscious of his royal image. The Persian court, centered in Susa, buzzed with advisors, generals, and bureaucrats, each eager to influence the young king's decisions. Xerxes, however, saw himself as the embodiment of the empire itself, believing that his rule was divinely sanctioned, and that nothing could withstand the might of Persia. It was against this backdrop that the ambition to conquer Greece took on a new intensity. The Greek city-states, fragmented yet fiercely independent, had long resisted Persian domination. Darius's earlier campaign had been a lesson in Greek resilience. Xerxes, however, was determined to succeed where his father had failed. He envisioned a campaign that would crush the Greek spirit once and for all, securing Persian dominance over the Aegean and sending a warning across the Mediterranean. The Persian Empire was invincible. The preparations for the invasion were unprecedented. Xerxes mobilized an army and navy that stretched the limits of logistics and ambition. According to historical sources, the Persian forces numbered in the hundreds of thousands, a combination of soldiers drawn from every corner of the empire. Persians, Medes, Elamites, and subject peoples from as far as India and Egypt. The Persian navy, tasked with controlling the Aegean Sea, included ships from Phoenicia, Carthage, and other maritime powers under Persian control. Xerxes spared no expense, employing engineers and laborers to construct pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, modern-day Dardanelles, to allow his massive army to cross from Asia into Europe. The crossing alone was a feat of engineering, symbolizing the king's determination and his empire's resources. Yet Xerxes' ambition was not merely military, it was also psychological. He sought to intimidate the Greeks into submission, leveraging not only his vast army but also his reputation. Stories of Persian grandeur, lavish palaces, and the immense wealth of the king circulated widely, reaching the ears of Greek city-states and sowing fear among their populations. The campaign was designed not just to defeat the Greeks in battle but to break their spirit entirely. In Xerxes' vision, conquest was as much about terror as it was about territory. By 480 BCE, Xerxes' preparations were complete and the Persian forces began their march into Hellas. The geography of Greece, mountainous, fragmented, and filled with narrow passes, posed challenges that Xerxes had likely underestimated. Yet he remained confident in the sheer scale of his forces, believing that no natural obstacle could withstand the might of Persia. His generals advised caution, warning that Greek city-states like Sparta and Athens were renowned for their discipline and martial skill. Xerxes, however, dismissed these warnings, confident that his overwhelming numbers would crush any resistance. The invasion began in a coordinated sweep across northern Greece. Persian detachments moved through Thessaly and Macedonia, subjugating towns and compelling local rulers to pay tribute or join his cause. Xerxes' approach to conquered cities combined pragmatism with brutality. Those who resisted were often destroyed or looted, while those who submitted were spared but required to contribute men and resources to the Persian war machine. The scale of the operation was staggering, with supply lines stretching hundreds of miles, maintained through an intricate system of depots, garrisons, and requisitioned resources. For the people of Hellas, the advance of Xerxes' army was a nightmare in motion. Families fled from villages and towns, attempting to escape the inevitable encounter with Persian forces. Historians recount stories of panic and despair as word of the approaching army spread. Greek city-states faced a critical decision: submit, flee, or prepare for battle. Sparta, with its legendary warriors, chose to resist, fortifying key passes such as Thermopylae, where a small force of Greeks would later make their famous stand. Athens, meanwhile, debated whether to defend the city or evacuate its population to the islands, a decision that underscored the tension between courage and survival. Amid the political and military preparations, the human cost of Xerxes' ambition began to manifest. The Persian army's advance was accompanied by looting, forced relocations, and the capture of civilians, particularly women and children. Ancient sources hint at the systematic targeting of families to weaken resistance and assert dominance. It was here, in the shadow of the invasion, that the darker aspects of Xerxes' campaign emerged, acts of cruelty and oppression that would leave a lasting mark on Greek memory. The king's vision of conquest extended beyond the battlefield. It encompassed the subjugation of a people and the destruction of their social fabric. As Xerxes crossed the Hellespont and entered Hellas, the stage was set for one of the most dramatic and consequential campaigns in ancient history. The Persian army, vast and disciplined, confronted a landscape of independent city-states determined to defend their homes. The battles to come, Thermopylae, Artemisium, and Salamis, would test the limits of strategy, courage, and human endurance. Yet even before these clashes, the invasion had already begun to expose the moral and human cost of Xerxes' ambition. The rise of Xerxes was not merely a tale of military conquest. It was a story of power, pride, and the lengths to which a ruler would go to assert his dominance over the world and its people. In retrospect, the invasion of Hellas under Xerxes was more than a military campaign. It was a turning point in the history of East and West. It revealed the vulnerabilities of both empires and city-states, showcased the extremes of human ambition, and set the stage for legendary acts of heroism and sacrifice. Above all, it marked the beginning of a chapter in which the daughters of Hellas, along with their communes, would face horrors that went far beyond the battlefield, foreshadowing the darker consequences of Xerxes' relentless drive for supremacy. Persian invasion of Hellas under Xerxes. The first was not merely a military campaign, it was an exercise in overwhelming force, terror, and strategic intimidation. Having crossed the Hellespont with his massive army and navy, Xerxes advanced into Greece with the precision of a ruler, determined to impose his will on the fragmented city-states. The conquest of Greek cities was marked by a combination of brute force, cunning diplomacy, and calculated cruelty, methods designed not only to subdue populations, but to obliterate the sense of autonomy that had long defined the Hellenic world. The Persian army moved with astonishing speed through Thessaly, a fertile region that provided ample supplies for the advancing host. Towns and villages along the route were presented with a stark choice: surrender and pay tribute, or resist and face annihilation. Those who resisted faced mass slaughter. Herodotus records that Persian forces would often burn entire settlements, leaving nothing behind but ash and ruin, a chilling warning to the next city in line. Families were separated, men were conscripted or killed, and women and children were often taken as captives or slaves. This calculated cruelty was a hallmark of Xerxes' strategy. By targeting civilians as well as soldiers, he sought to crush Greek morale before the armies even met on the battlefield. One of the first major cities to feel the wrath of Xerxes' army was Thessalonica, modern Thessaloniki. While some accounts suggest the city attempted negotiation, the Persian response was swift and brutal. Soldiers razed homes, desecrated temples, and carried off wealth in gold, silver, and food supplies. The destruction served as a message to other city-states: no settlement, however fortified, was beyond Persian reach. This combination of fear and intimidation became a psychological weapon as news of the devastation spread rapidly across Hellas. As the Persian forces moved south, they encountered Eretria, a city on the island of Euboea, which played a critical role in the early stages of the Persian campaign. The Eretrians had previously supported the Ionian revolt against Persian rule, and Xerxes considered their punishment both necessary and exemplary. When the Persians captured Eretria, they executed prominent citizens, enslaved a large portion of the population, and burned the city to the ground. The destruction of Eretria sent shockwaves through Greece, demonstrating that defiance would be met with merciless retribution. The psychological impact on neighboring cities, including Athens, cannot be overstated. Fear of Persian reprisal now loomed as large as the threat of their armies. Athens, the jewel of Hellas, soon faced the reality of Xerxes' approach. While the Spartan forces prepared for a defensive stand at Thermopylae, Athens debated whether to resist or evacuate its population. Ultimately, the decision was made to evacuate the city, sending its residents, including women and children, to nearby islands for safety. Xerxes' army marched into Athens unopposed, only to find the city nearly empty. Frustrated by the lack of resistance, the Persians sacked the city, setting fire to the Acropolis, looting treasures, and destroying temples. The deliberate targeting of cultural and religious landmarks was a strategic move. By erasing symbols of Greek identity and faith, Xerxes sought to undermine the spirit of resistance. The conquest of Greek cities also revealed the logistical prowess and discipline of the Persian military machine. Xerxes had meticulously planned supply lines to support his massive army. Depots were established along the route, and soldiers were organized into units representing the diversity of the empire: Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, and other subject peoples. This not only demonstrated the vast reach of Persian control, but also reinforced the psychological dominance over conquered territories. The sheer diversity and size of the army reinforced the notion that resistance was futile. Greek citizens, witnessing the scale of Xerxes' forces, were confronted with the terrifying reality that the Persian Empire could mobilize hundreds of thousands of soldiers with near-perfect coordination. Yet the conquest was not solely a display of military might, it also involved strategic manipulation and coercion. Xerxes frequently employed local collaborators to govern occupied cities, installing puppet leaders who would enforce Persian rule and extract tribute. In some cases, city-states were coerced into providing soldiers for the Persian army, further weakening their capacity for independent defense. The combination of fear, propaganda, and strategic alliances allowed Xerxes to extend his influence with remarkable efficiency. Those who submitted were spared immediate destruction, but they were marked as subservient, their autonomy stripped, and their societies reshaped according to Persian interests. Amid the destruction of cities, the fate of women became particularly grim. Captured women were often taken as spoils of war, a practice not uncommon in ancient military campaigns, but one that Xerxes' forces executed on a large and systematic scale. Ancient accounts, though fragmentary, suggest that women from Athens, Eretria, and other captured cities were enslaved, forced to serve in Persian households, or transported to the heart of the empire. These acts were not only a means of personal gain for soldiers, but also a calculated method to undermine Greek society by removing women, the backbone of families and the transmitters of culture. Xerxes weakened the social fabric of Hellas. The psychological impact of these actions cannot be understated. Entire communities were destabilized. Men faced the dual threat of death or conscription, while women were subjected to captivity and exploitation. Children were separated from their families, either killed or raised under foreign authority. The Persian conquest of Greek cities was thus not merely a military operation, it was an assault on the very identity and continuity of Greek society. By targeting civilians alongside military opponents, Xerxes amplified the terror of invasion, ensuring that even those who survived bore the scars of fear, loss, and trauma. Despite the overwhelming scale of the Persian campaign, some Greek city-states resisted with remarkable courage. Sparta and its allies mounted defensive actions that would become legendary, holding passes and engaging Persian forces in battles that, while ultimately unsuccessful in stopping Xerxes' march, demonstrated that the Greeks would not succumb entirely to fear. Yet these acts of valor occurred against the backdrop of cities that had been utterly devastated. Athens lay in ruins, Eretria had been annihilated, and countless smaller settlements had suffered similar fates. The human and cultural cost of Xerxes' conquest was immense, leaving an indelible mark on Greek memory and collective consciousness. In conclusion, the conquest of Greek cities by Xerxes' forces was a combination of military genius, ruthless strategy, and systematic cruelty. It demonstrated the capabilities of the Persian Empire while exposing the vulnerabilities of the fragmented Greek city-states. Beyond the battlefield, the occupation of cities involved the looting of wealth, the destruction of cultural landmarks, and the targeting of civilians, especially women, as instruments of terror. By the time Xerxes' army reached the heart of Hellas, the stage was set not only for further military engagements, but also for acts of brutality that would resonate throughout history. The conquest of cities was more than a prelude to battle, it was a calculated campaign to assert Persian dominance over the Greek world and to crush the spirit of its people, leaving wounds that would echo long after the soldiers had marched home. When the vast Persian army of Xerxes swept through Hellas, the devastation was not limited to cities, temples, or military forces. Among the most vulnerable victims of this colossal invasion were the women of Greece, the daughters, wives, and mothers whose lives were upended by war and conquest. The fate of these women reveals a darker dimension of Xerxes' campaign, one that extended beyond the battlefield into the very heart of Greek society, targeting its families, culture, and identity. From the first encounters in Thessaly to the sack of Athens and Eretria, Greek women experienced the full brunt of Persian aggression. While men faced the immediate threat of conscription or execution, women were often captured, enslaved, or forcibly relocated. These actions were not incidental, they were an integral part of Persian military strategy. In the eyes of Xerxes and his generals, conquering a people meant more than defeating their armies. It meant subjugating their families, erasing their cultural continuity, and asserting dominance over every aspect of daily life. Women, as the bearers of households and transmitters of Greek tradition, became both tools and victims of this campaign. The abduction and enslavement of women followed a calculated pattern. Ancient sources, notably Herodotus, describe Persian soldiers taking women from cities as spoils of war, transporting them far from their homes to prevent any possibility of resistance or rescue. These women were distributed among Persian households, used as concubines, servants, or laborers. In some cases, they were brought to the Persian heartland, in Susa or Persepolis, where they lived under the watch of the royal court. The trauma of such displacement cannot be overstated. Entire families were torn apart, and women were forced to adapt to a foreign culture, language, and social system under the constant threat of violence. Athens provides one of the most dramatic examples of this tragedy. When Xerxes' army marched into the city in 480 BCE, the Athenians had largely evacuated, sending many citizens to nearby islands. However, those who remained, including women, children, and the elderly, faced the full wrath of the invaders. Temples and homes were looted, and women were captured to serve as slaves in Persian households or to be paraded as symbols of conquest. The sack of Athens was not merely a military victory, it was a symbolic act meant to humiliate the city and its people, with women bearing the most personal and degrading consequences. Eretria suffered a similar, if not more brutal, fate. After a brief resistance, the city fell to Persian forces. Historical accounts recount the execution of male citizens, the burning of homes and temples, and the forced relocation of women and children. These women were enslaved or transported, a deliberate tactic to weaken Greek social cohesion. By removing women from their communities, Xerxes not only punished cities for resistance, but also aimed to prevent the reconstitution of local families and civic life. The destruction was both physical and societal, targeting the structures that held Greek cities together. The experiences of women under Persian rule extended beyond captivity and displacement. Those who were taken into Persian households often faced coercion, forced servitude, and sexual exploitation. While such practices were tragically common in ancient warfare, the scale at which Xerxes' forces carried them out, affecting thousands of women across Hellas, was unprecedented in Greek memory. Families were left fragmented and communities traumatized as the traditional roles of women as mothers, wives, and caretakers were violently disrupted. The psychological impact of these acts, fear, grief, and helplessness, permeated Greek society for generations. This systematic targeting of women also served a strategic purpose. By removing or exploiting women, Xerxes weakened the Greek city-state's ability to maintain morale and continuity. Greek men, facing threats to their families, were forced into defensive or desperate measures, their attention divided between survival and vengeance. Women, meanwhile, became unintentional pawns in a larger political and military game, their suffering amplifying the terror intended by Persian conquest. The humiliation of women was thus inseparable from the broader objectives of Xerxes' campaign to subdue not only armies but entire societies. Yet amid this darkness, there are accounts of resilience and resistance. Some Greek women found ways to protect their children, hide valuables, or negotiate survival under Persian occupation. Others were later rescued or reunited with their families after the Persian retreat, bringing stories of endurance that became part of Greek cultural memory. While the historical record is fragmentary, these glimpses of defiance highlight the courage and ingenuity of women even in the face of overwhelming oppression. The impact of these events on Greek culture and identity was profound. The capture and enslavement of women disrupted family structures, eroded local traditions, and left communities struggling to recover long after the Persian army had withdrawn. These experiences became central to Greek narratives of Persia, an aggression, fueling a collective memory of suffering and heroism. Literature, art, and historical writing in the centuries that followed repeatedly returned to these themes, memorializing both the horrors endured and the resilience displayed. Greek tragedies, for instance, often explored the consequences of war on families and the suffering of women, echoing the real-life trauma of the Persian invasions. Moreover, the fate of Greek women under Xerxes' rule had long-term political and social consequences. Survivors of these campaigns often bore children under Persian captivity or influence, complicating family lineages and local loyalties. Communities had to rebuild not only their cities, but also their social fabric, integrating those who had been displaced or traumatized. In many ways, the Persian conquest left wounds that were as cultural and psychological as they were physical, shaping Greek society's perception of foreign powers and informing future military and political strategies. The stories of Greek women during Xerxes' invasion also serve as a lens through which to understand the broader human cost of ancient warfare. While kings, generals, and armies often dominate historical narratives, the experiences of civilians, especially women, reveal the personal and societal toll of conquest. In Hellas, the daughters, wives, and mothers captured by Persian forces endured not only immediate violence but also the long-lasting consequences of displacement, trauma, and social upheaval. Their suffering became a silent witness to the ambitions of an empire, a reminder that victory in war is often inseparable from human misery. In reflecting on this dark chapter of history, it becomes clear that the fate of Greek women under Persian rule was both a tragedy and a testament to endurance. While Xerxes' ambition brought devastation, it also inadvertently highlighted the resilience of Greek society. Women who survived captivity, escaped, or were reunited with their families contributed to the rebuilding of their cities and the preservation of cultural traditions. Their experiences, though often marginalized in historical accounts, are essential to understanding the full impact of Xerxes' invasion and the broader narrative of resistance and survival in ancient Greece. In conclusion, the fate of Greek women during Xerxes' invasion of Hellas reveals a calculated dimension of Persian military strategy, subjugating families, destabilizing communities, and using terror as a tool of conquest. The capture, enslavement, and exploitation of women not only inflicted immediate suffering, but also left lasting scars on Greek society and cultural memory. While their stories are often overshadowed by accounts of battles and generals, these women bore the human cost of empire, enduring hardships that tested the limits of resilience and courage. The legacy of their suffering, resilience, and eventual survival remains an indelible part of the history of Xerxes' invasion, reminding us that the horrors of war extend far beyond the battlefield and into the lives of those who are often least equipped to defend themselves. Persian invasion of Hellas under Xerxes. The first was often measured in the scale of armies, the clash of soldiers, and the strategic brilliance or folly of generals. Yet, the true depth of Xerxes' conquest cannot be fully understood by battles alone. Beyond Thermopylae, Artemisium, and Salamis lay the far more insidious consequences of his campaign, the profound cultural and social devastation inflicted upon Greek society. Cities were not only destroyed, families were torn apart, traditions disrupted, and a collective psyche scarred by the weight of occupation and terror. The conquest reached into the very soul of Hellas, leaving wounds far more enduring than those etched by swords or spears. At the most visible level, Xerxes' armies laid waste to the physical infrastructure of Greek cities. Athens, the crown jewel of Hellas, suffered perhaps the most emblematic blow. While many citizens had evacuated, leaving only the elderly, women and children, Xerxes' forces systematically looted and burned the city. The Acropolis, the spiritual and civic heart of Athens, was ravaged. Temples, altars and sanctuaries, sites of worship, cultural gatherings and communal identity were reduced to rubble. Artworks, precious relics, and sacred objects were stolen or destroyed, depriving future generations of the tangible markers of their history. Other cities, such as Eretria and smaller settlements across Boeotia and Attica, faced similar fates: homes burned, marketplaces looted, and entire neighborhoods erased. The physical destruction alone left communities with the monumental task of rebuilding, often without the resources, population, or morale to restore what had been lost. However, the devastation went far deeper than the loss of buildings or material wealth. The Persian conquest attacked the very social fabric of Greek society. Families were fragmented by the death, enslavement, or forced relocation of men and women. Women were captured as spoils of war, men were killed or forced into Persian service, and children were orphaned or separated from their parents. The result was a generation marked by trauma, fear, and instability. Communities that had functioned for centuries as interconnected networks of families and citizens found themselves struggling to maintain cohesion. Social roles, once clearly defined, were disrupted. Greek women, as we have discussed, were removed from homes and forced into servitude, eroding the domestic structures that anchored civic life. The psychological toll on survivors, grief, despair, and the constant awareness of vulnerability was as devastating as any battlefield defeat. Xerxes' strategy also extended to the deliberate humiliation of Greek identity. By attacking symbols of culture, religion, and civic pride, he aimed to impose not only political control but psychological dominance. Temples were desecrated, statues toppled, and cultural artifacts stolen. Religious rituals, central to the cohesion of city-states, were interrupted or forbidden. Public spaces, including theatres, agoras, and assembly halls, were either destroyed or rendered inaccessible. These acts communicated a simple, terrifying message: the Persian Empire could bend not only armies but minds, erasing the symbols and practices that defined a people. The destruction of Athens' cultural landmarks, in particular, resonated across Hellas, symbolizing the vulnerability of even the most prominent and seemingly invincible cities. The social repercussions of Xerxes' invasion also extended into politics and governance. Many Greek city-states faced the imposition of Persian-friendly leaders or puppet regimes. While some cities attempted to negotiate survival through tribute or cooperation, these arrangements were rarely stable. Leaders who collaborated with the Persians were often seen as traitors by their own people, creating tensions and internal divisions that persisted long after the Persian army withdrew. The destabilization of political structures compounded the social devastation, leaving communities without the leadership necessary to recover effectively. Governance, law, and civic decision-making, once the pride of the Greek polis, were undermined, further eroding societal cohesion. Cultural memory of the invasion also played a significant role in shaping Greek identity. Stories of burned cities, captured women, and lost treasures became central narratives, influencing art, literature, and historical writing for generations. Tragedians like Aeschylus, who himself fought in the Persian Wars, infused their plays with themes of suffering, displacement, and the consequences of foreign occupation. Herodotus, writing decades later, chronicled not only battles but the human cost of Xerxes' campaign, emphasizing the devastation inflicted on civilians and communities. Through these narratives, the social and cultural impact of the invasion was preserved, ensuring that future generations understood both the horrors and the resilience of those affected. One of the most insidious aspects of Xerxes' cultural and social devastation was its impact on continuity and identity. The abduction of women, the deaths of leaders and warriors, and the destruction of sacred sites disrupted the transmission of knowledge, customs, and traditions. Religious festivals, civic rituals, and educational practices were interrupted, leaving gaps in the communal memory of generations. Oral traditions, central to Greek identity, were threatened by the scattering of populations. In many ways, the Persian campaign represented not only a physical conquest, but an assault on the continuity of Greek civilization itself. Yet amidst the destruction, the invasion also revealed the resilience and adaptability of Greek society. Communities that survived Xerxes' onslaught demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness. Women who remained or returned from captivity took on central roles in rebuilding families and neighborhoods. Civic leaders who survived the occupation worked tirelessly to restore order, law, and culture. Artists, artisans, and religious figures resumed their roles, preserving traditions and ensuring that the memory of Greek identity endured despite Persian attempts to erase it. This resilience would later become a central theme in Greek historical and literary accounts, emphasizing the enduring spirit of a people who had faced overwhelming adversity. Furthermore, the social and cultural devastation had strategic consequences for future conflicts. The trauma inflicted on Greek communities heightened both fear and determination. The collective memory of suffering under Xerxes fueled a desire for resistance, revenge, and unity among city-states. Athens, Sparta, and their allies, scarred but unbroken, would later leverage this memory in the formation of coalitions, such as the Delian League, to defend against further Persian aggression. The cultural and social scars of the invasion, while painful, became a source of cohesion and identity, shaping the narrative of Greek resilience against overwhelming odds. In analyzing the consequences of Xerxes' invasion beyond the battlefield, it becomes evident that the Persian campaign was as much a war on society as it was on armies. Cities were leveled, families shattered, and cultural practices disrupted. Yet in the destruction lay the seeds of renewal, as survivors adapted, rebuilt, and preserved their identity against the backdrop of trauma. The Persian attempt to erase Greek civilization failed in the long term, but the immediate social and cultural devastation was profound, leaving scars that would influence Greek history, art, and literature for generations. In conclusion, the impact of Xerxes' conquest extended far beyond the battlefield. It encompassed the destruction of infrastructure, the abduction and subjugation of women, the destabilization of governance, and the disruption of cultural continuity. Greek society was forced to confront not only the physical might of the Persian Empire, but the psychological and social consequences of invasion. The devastation of cities and the fragmentation of communities illustrated the true cost of Xerxes' ambition, an assault on the identity, cohesion, and resilience of an entire civilization. Yet, the response of Greek society, the rebuilding of cities, the preservation of traditions, and the cultivation of collective memory ensured that this destruction, while lasting, would ultimately be transformed into a story of survival, resilience, and eventual triumph. Persian invasion of Hellas under Xerxes. The first was more than a military campaign. It was an event that left an indelible mark on Greek society, culture, and historical memory. While battles like Thermopylae, Artemisium, and Salamis are often highlighted for their tactical brilliance and heroism, the broader legacy of Xerxes' campaign lies in the long-lasting impact it had on the Greek psyche, the narratives of suffering and resilience, and the way these events shaped the identity of Hellas for centuries to come. Understanding this legacy requires a close examination of how the invasion was remembered, interpreted, and utilized by subsequent generations of Greeks. First and foremost, the invasion solidified Xerxes as a symbol of tyranny and overwhelming force in Greek historical consciousness. Ancient historians, particularly Herodotus, who lived within decades of the Persian Wars, emphasized the scale, ambition, and cruelty of Xerxes' campaign. In Herodotus's narratives, Xerxes is portrayed not merely as a military opponent, but as a figure whose hubris and desire for domination over all of Greece made him a cautionary example of unchecked power. The terror he inflicted on cities, the abduction and enslavement of women, and the destruction of sacred sites were chronicled in detail, ensuring that future generations would remember not only the battles, but also the suffering endured by ordinary people. This portrayal cemented a dichotomy between Greek valor and Persian oppression, framing the invasion as a moral as well as a military struggle. The memory of Xerxes' campaign also became a central theme in Greek literature, drama, and historiography. Playwrights like Aeschylus, who personally experienced the Persian Wars, incorporated the events into tragedies such as The Persians, which dramatized the Persian defeat at Salamis and the consequences of hubris. In these works, the focus is not solely on military victory, but on the psychological, cultural, and moral dimensions of the conflict. The suffering of civilians, particularly women and children, is woven into these narratives, highlighting the human cost of empire and invasion. These literary depictions reinforced collective memory, ensuring that the experiences of the conquered, those who were captured, enslaved, or displaced, were not forgotten even as Greek cities rebuilt and recovered. Beyond literature, the invasion shaped Greek identity in profound ways. The trauma of Xerxes' campaign and the heroism displayed in resistance fostered a sense of unity among otherwise fragmented city-states. While Athens and Sparta were political rivals, the shared memory of suffering under Persian rule provided common ground for alliances and cooperation. The Persian Wars became a foundational narrative, emphasizing themes of courage, sacrifice, and cultural perseverance. Greek identity, which had been locally focused within individual polis, began to incorporate a pan-Hellenic consciousness, an awareness of shared language, religion, and heritage that transcended political divisions. In this sense, the devastation wrought by Xerxes paradoxically strengthened the cultural cohesion of Hellas. The legacy of the invasion also had significant military and strategic implications. Greek city-states, scarred by the experience of Persian occupation, re-evaluated their approaches to defense and alliance. Athens, having suffered the sack of its city and the destruction of the Acropolis, invested heavily rebuilding fortifications and its navy, eventually establishing the Delian League to protect against future Persian aggression. Sparta, meanwhile, reinforced its reputation as a military powerhouse, emphasizing discipline, training, and preparedness. The collective memory of Xerxes' overwhelming force informed Greek strategies for generations, influencing both defensive tactics and broader political alliances. The psychological impact of invasion, fear, trauma, and the awareness of vulnerability was translated into concrete measures that shaped the trajectory of Greek military and political history. Religious and cultural memory also played a role in shaping the legacy of Xerxes' campaign. Temples, sanctuaries, and sacred sites that had been destroyed or desecrated during the invasion were meticulously rebuilt in the decades that followed. This reconstruction was not only a practical matter, but also a symbolic act, signaling resilience and the reclaiming of cultural identity. Religious festivals, rituals, and civic ceremonies were revived, reinforcing communal bonds and preserving traditions that the Persian occupation had threatened to erase. In this way, the memory of devastation became intertwined with a narrative of recovery, celebrating the endurance of Greek culture despite the atrocities inflicted by Xerxes' forces. Another important aspect of the legacy is the long-term social consequences of the invasion. Families that had been fragmented by death, displacement, or enslavement had to be reconstituted. Survivors of Persian captivity, especially women and children, returned to their communities, carrying with them stories of suffering, survival, and resilience. These personal narratives contributed to the collective understanding of the invasion and its impact, ensuring that the human dimension of Xerxes' campaign was remembered alongside the grander military and political events. Oral traditions, passed down through generations, preserved the memory of these experiences, embedding them in the social fabric of Hellas. The invasion also left an enduring impression on Greek philosophy and historiography. The Persian Wars and Xerxes' role in them became a case study in the dangers of hubris, unchecked ambition, and imperial overreach. Thinkers such as Thucydides and later historians reflected on the human cost of empire, the consequences of moral and strategic failures, and the resilience required to recover from catastrophe. Xerxes' ambition, while temporarily successful in terms of military conquest, ultimately failed to secure lasting control over Greece. His legacy, therefore, was one of both awe-inspiring power and cautionary failure, providing lessons that resonated far beyond the immediate events of the 5th century BCE. Furthermore, the Persian invasion became a central element of Greek national mythology and identity, influencing not only contemporary narratives, but also the way Hellas was remembered by subsequent civilizations. The story of Greek resistance against overwhelming odds, including the heroism of Spartan warriors at Thermopylae and the cunning of Athenian naval strategy at Salamis, became emblematic of the values of courage, strategy, and civic duty. Xerxes, as the embodiment of foreign tyranny and oppression, served as a foil against which these virtues were defined. The collective memory of suffering and triumph shaped both historical understanding and cultural identity, ensuring that the events of the Persian invasion were never merely distant history, but a foundational narrative for Greek civilization. In conclusion, the legacy and historical memory of Xerxes' invasion of Hellas are multifaceted, encompassing moral, cultural, social, and strategic dimensions. The devastation inflicted on cities, the abduction and subjugation of women, and the disruption of social and religious life created wounds that would last for generations. Yet, these very experiences contributed to the shaping of Greek identity, fostering unity, resilience, and a collective consciousness that celebrated survival and defiance. Xerxes' campaign, while temporarily successful in its display of overwhelming force, ultimately became a defining chapter in the history of Hellas, not only as a story of destruction, but also as a testament to human endurance, cultural preservation, and the enduring spirit of a civilization that refused to be erased through literature, historiography, and collective memory. The invasion under Xerxes has remained a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration, illustrating the complex interplay between conquest and resistance, terror and resilience, destruction and cultural preservation. The daughters of Hellas, the citizens of Athens and Sparta, and the countless communities that suffered under Persian occupation became central characters in a narrative that extended far beyond the battlefield. Their experiences, preserved through stories, art, and historical reflection, ensured that the legacy of Xerxes' invasion would endure as a defining moment in the cultural and historical consciousness of Greece, and as a timeless reminder of both the horrors and the resilience of human societies in the face of overwhelming power.